Hello YouTube fans, this is TheSkullKlown. Someone wanted me to talk about why are they afraid of the 80s and 90s kids. So we, the reason they're afraid of the 80s and 90s kids is because when some of us reincarnated and we went to the light, basically, and we went to, when it goes to the moon and everything like that, because they make you, they make you go reincarnate basically, and you forget everything, but you go to the moon. But not all of us forget about that. Some of us just go to the moon so we can actually transfer our bodies to go to Earth to know what's happening. And remember, we agreed to be here because if we won't agree to be here, we won't be here. Going through the system. And we made these evil reptilians too to go through this system, but they took it too far. So obviously, we have to stop them. But during the 80s and 90s era, they saw beings that were going to come over here that they did not like, basically. Because those beings that came here were going to change the fucking world. And they were sick and tired of what was happening, basically. And once that happened, they were fucking scared. That's why they started making a lot of, good movies, good video games, good cartoon shows, from the 80s and 90s and everything like that. And then I remember, even as a kid, because they distract you a lot in the 80s and 90s. A lot. More than the 70s and all that shit. Because they tried so hard to do it. And back then, I even heard that when I was first getting it, when I was being more in tune with myself and I was putting my vibration high and high, I've heard that back in the 60s when they were showing UFOs, they thought their system was going to be over there. That's one of the reasons why they showed you UFOs, talk about in movies and all that. They didn't put it in the news, but they talked about it in movies and all that shit because they just knew that eventually we were going to figure this out, or they were going to their system was going to end around that time. They knew around the 60s or 70s, that's when everything was starting to like crumble and everything like that, but some of them didn't think that way, But once the 70s, but once the 80s and 90s hit, nah. They were like, nah. We can't have this because the reason they're afraid of us is because we're not going to take their shit. They saw beings that knew, warriors, to be honest, assassin warriors, that knew that we wouldn't take the system shit. So they did anything possible for us to be downgraded once we came to this life. And obviously, if we didn't wake up and they did all this stuff to us, like, we watched news, fell in love with these video games and all that. Not to say we didn't play these video games or watch these movies. Of course we did. But eventually, some of us were going to wake up. They tried really hard to make us not wake up. But they knew some of us were going to wake up because they couldn't fool us. They knew there were certain types of souls they could have manipulate, and they knew that there was some type of souls that they couldn't manipulate. Because it depends what type of soul you have, once they find out that your soul is kind of like, still like a baby, not ancient, like people have past lives and they just know. The people that woke up early, like around 2012 and everything like that, a little bit beyond before that, those are the old souls, basically. And again, they came back here to fight for what the fuck they have to, Again, some of them were reincarnated, not all of them. Some of them did reincarnate thousands of times just to come back here to remember, and that's why sometimes it's important to know some of the knowledge that you have in previous lives, or say if you don't know about the whole not going to the light then in this life, you could get fucked up and not even know that until the next life, or you might not even know it because they worked the system so hard, basically, especially in the 80s and 90s, that it was just pushed forward. Have you noticed even religion was kind of pushed forward in the 80s and 90s? I kind of noticed that. I don't know. That's just me. Maybe that's just me. I was a kid in the 90s. I was born in 93. But I did notice that they were trying to push more religion times and all that shit. Especially around 2012. When 2012 hit, people were just so that religious and shit like that. People were like, oh no, the reason the war didn't end it because God didn't want to. We're the gods and goddesses, okay? We're the gods and goddesses, all right? 2012 just told these motherfuckers, yeah, it's over for you, basically. And then when the whole conjunction happened, it's like, yeah, It's definitely your system's done. Now it's our time to rise. All right, that's the whole thing with the whole convergence that was happening with Jupiter and not Jupiter and Neptune, Jupiter and Saturn, I believe. But that's what they say, you know. But moving on with that. So, and you got to pay attention to some of these shows and movies and video games that they made in the 80s and 90s. The reason they knew who we were is because you see some of these video games. Look at Final Fantasy, for example. Look at Final Fantasy. Look at some of these 80s movies, like the Superman movie. Batman. You know? They even made Terminator. I'm not saying we're the Terminators, but the reason they made that in the 80s is because they were like, no, no. We're showing you what we're going to use to fight your ass. I'm telling you, the 80s, they showed you a lot of shit in the 80s and 90s, man, of what they want to do to us and who's going to face us. They weren't playing around in the 80s and 90s. That's why in the 80s you hear a lot of fucking crazy shit, like sex trafficking and all that shit. Like, that was crazy, like, to its breaking point in the 80s, in my opinion. Most people be like, oh, it probably was like a breaking point in the medieval days because no one there had a camera then. Who knows, man? Who knows? These motherfuckers have been around forever, and we knew what they did. So, and we always stopped them. You know, it's just when we fell in frequency, that's when some of us just forgot who they were. Look at the Dark Crystal. The Dark Crystal came out in the 80s. Jim Henson died for making that fucking movie. Why? Because he showed what the reptilians really look like. They look like Skeksis from the Dark Crystal. A lot of people say, no, there's different ones. Of course there's different ones. It's not just one that looks like a bird. There's one that looks like you see in the Spider-Man movie. Not the Sam Raimi one, but the reboot one with Andrew Garfield. You know, when you saw that one, I knew that they're telling you right there that, yeah, that's what some of them look like. Now, all of them are tall and all that shit. Because some of them are the same size as us, like the Skeksis you see in the Dark Crystal. And they have different names. Some people want to call that a different name. But sorry, the reason I'm talking about different things is because it goes back to what these evil beings want. And, what these evil beings want. They want us to be dumbed down. That's why they killed Jim Henson with the Dark Crystal movie. Because that Dark Crystal movie, Jim Henson wanted to show the 80s kids, and especially the 90s kids, what all these beings are. Some of these people that made these movies, they want to show you who it was, Eyes Wide Shut. That came out in the 90s, I believe, right? Or a little bit in the 2000s. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the person that made that movie was trying to show you something. You know? All these 80s and movies tell you something. Even before the 80s and 90s, obviously, they had other movies that were telling you shit. But this was more important the 80s and 90s were more potent of showing what was going to happen in the future or what these evil beings wanted us to do. Is because we were being born around this time. Literally, they knew who was coming here. They knew who was coming here. They knew that a being like that was going to come over here. So they tried to do anything possible to make sure we didn't wake up. Look at the Super Mario Brothers game. That thing is a phenomenon. Why? And if you look at it in a third eye, if in a higher self-knowledge, if you look at that Super Mario Brothers movie and you see in a high knowledge, you see that Mario, all the moves that he has, that's what we can do. We can jump high. We can literally stomp on freaking turtles and shit. And it's funny because those Goombas are actually reptiles. They have beaks. You gotta see. You gotta see right here, guys. You really do. You really got to see the symbolism here. And Bowser, in a way, is almost like Marduk, a.k.a. Zeus, a.k.a. Satan. You know, he almost kind of dresses that way. And in one of his forms, if you see the Anunnaki statue, basically, one of the Sumerian statues when he's fighting Tiamat with wings and everything like that, yes, that's what he looks like. And then one of them, he has wings too, but he has a eagle face, basically. Like you see in the Dark Crystal. But he was tall. Because he's one of our brothers. He's tall. But again, I don't want people to think I'm getting distracted here. I'm just things that I just want to mention when it goes to that. Because these people don't want us to know who they are. And when they show stuff like this, For example, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas came out in the 90s, right? And I have this movie right here. Let me see. See, 1998, I believe, right? I believe. I believe it is in 1998. But I don't want to be too long here because I don't want to get you guys being like, oh, you're here all day and shit like that. But I'm just trying to make sure I do got it right. But I mean, what else can you say? Look, I have a movie, The Last Starfighter, Legend, some of your Godzilla movies that came out in the 80s. There's a lot of shit that I can mention that they try to distract us with because there was just, again, have you noticed that there was a lot of stuff that was really good that people want to remember and want to go back to? There's a reason why you still highlight the 90s and the 80s nowadays. There's a reason for that. And I don't want to repeat myself, but again, there is a reason, you know? And some of the stuff that we grew up in the 90s, like, for example, SpongeBob SquarePants, that's a 90s cartoon. It started in the 90s. But if you really think about it in a spiritual way, that's Atlantis. It might take place in Bikini Bottom, but it's really Atlantis. You know? That's how we used to be, you know? But there's so many things also. But I could make a part two if you want me to make a part two, anyone. But this video is going to close right now because of memory. But yeah, that's really it. That's all I can think of right now. I'll probably research more about what we went through and why they put the